Emma, thank you so much for joining me today on the recently rebranded An Idiot's Guide to Academic Research podcast.
That is like perfect for probably what I'm going to offer.
Well, no, I'm the idiot.
Oh, okay.
I'll clarify that.
I'd take it.
I think I want to just begin by talking about what you've been doing recently. You went and did a talk in front of the United Nations.
Yeah, I was part of an event. It was the Commission on the Rights of Women that was being hosted at the United Nations in New York. And I was invited to be part of a panel event really showcasing looking at equality in sport and a generation for equality, and thinking about women in sport and beyond, and getting to showcase some of my work on virtual spaces and safeguarding athletes in virtual environments. So yeah, it was a really amazing invitation and opportunity to go and showcase my work, but also realise like the relevance of that. So people do look to sport to be able to provide some of these answers, and to be part of a broader discussion about the safety of women was a real privilege.
Why do you think that is, that sport is used as that sort of vehicle?
Do you know, the worst thing is I don't think, or maybe it's me personally, I don't think I've sold enough the work that we're doing in sport. That we realise that as this little microcosm of society, to be able to look at particular cases. My work looks at how elite athletes and their entourage can experience violence in virtual spaces. Yeah, but that's happening everywhere. As we know, like social media is really changing the way that we interact. It's changing the face of how we function as human beings in societies. And what it kind of made me realise is actually our work can show, it can be used elsewhere, and as part of that broader discussion to really understand these spaces and the impact of them on the lives of women and girls for this discussion, but more broadly, like people and society. So for me, it was really affirming that actually I probably don't sell enough the work that we're doing and its relevance, and to be part of that broader discussion at the UN, linked to the UN SDGs, and thinking about the safety of women was just, incredible.
SDGs is Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
Ding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it really brought that to life. So I felt really privileged I was invited by the IOC, so the International Olympic Committee, to be part of their expert panel. And that's part of some of the other work they've been doing, looking at speaking more broadly about violence in online spaces and safety around major games. So, yeah, really cool.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on the sort of things that were discussed at this panel, this expert panel? Can you delve into some of the sort of specifics of this problem? And, is it certain social medias as opposed to others? Is it across the board?
Yeah, I think it might be good to give a bit of a backdrop as to how I came to do that work. So I did my PhD looking at how athletes can experience abuse within sporting spaces. A very long time ago, I competed at the top level, and my experiences at times were very mixed, but I would hear stories and also, witness experiences where you kind of think, would that be accepted in any other environment? But as an athlete, I was relatively silent to that. And then I went on to study sports psychology. And I remember being in a coaching lecture and, a university lecturer talking about the emotional abuse of athletes, and sitting there and thinking, oh, hold on, that's how I was coached. So it led me to do my PhD in that area. And then I started interviewing athletes about the experience of being an elite athlete, the demands of high performance environment. I went into that thinking that I would look at violence within the coach-athlete relationship and all peer-to-peer relationships. And the athletes that I was speaking to started saying, hey, this is happening. I've experienced that. But try now being an athlete in modern society with one of these. And they held up a smartphone. They said, I need a brand, I need a social media following, I connect online, events are streamed, they're linked to me, and this has opened up a whole new world of violence that I didn't anticipate experiencing. And then I went to have a look, and I realised that that there hadn't been work done on that. And I think part of that is sport was quite slow anyway in realising that it was a space where abuse could occur. And so we've been so focused on safeguarding physical spaces that we forgot that the world had moved. And lots of people now interact in virtual space, and that had been a game changer. So what have we found? We found that athletes and their entourage do experience online violence.
When you say their entourage, you mean like their friends, family, coaches?
Yeah, because everyone around, if you look at the athlete at the centre, that everyone around them, be it coaches, medical staff, scientific staff, family, friends, just even some of the work that we've done has looked at organisational the fandom, that running commentary online around sports events that, is passionate, it isn't regulated, and often it's abusive.
And people get passionate about sport more so than probably any other thing in life, it seems, from my perspective. And as you say, that probably often tips over into abuse.
Yeah.
And abusive sort of name calling. And
that's it. And so I went and had a look at the research body, expecting it to be there. You kind of go in and you think, someone's got to have done this. And they hadn't. There was some early work from a fantastic researcher in America called Jimmy Sanderson, who had looked at online parasocial interaction, so that feeling of like being connected to sports fans and knowing them as a person. Like online made us kind of not just feel like we're watching people, but we can interact with them, and how that can turn toxic. So my first study just went and looked at, okay, well, what happens? What can we do to try and classify or understand the type of abuse that gets experienced online? And, interestingly, like I said, it maps to real world settings. So threats of physical violence, sexualized violence, discriminatory abuse, all of those things are present in virtual spaces. And then as I went on through the work, I started looking at the type of violence they experienced, and I realised that men and women, male and female athletes, experienced a different type of violence online. And often the violence that's targeting women athletes has a gendered element. It's very sexualised. It can be more physically threatening in ways, and that has led to recent work on gender-based violence online, and that was part of what I was speaking about on the panel.
Right. So you're slowly sort of narrowing down because you're just realising that there's more specific problems with regards to gender and abuse online, as you say.
And research takes you in different ways, doesn't it? And I've been really fortunate that, each study has kind of moved out of the next, and realising when you analyse data that what you're seeing here needs further investigation. And being at the early stages of this field, there's now some, other fantastic researchers doing work, across online spaces, but it gave me scope to look in different areas.
So I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, what sport was it that you performed at top level at?
I played hockey. It feels like so long ago now. No, I
won't ask your age.
I'm a sports psychologist, and all the time I'm talking to athletes, especially if they're at the end of the career, and I'm like, you've got to remember about, they're like, will I be relevant? And then I have to be careful that I don't do the same thing. I don't go, it was so long ago, it doesn't count. But yeah, I played hockey, and then, that was part of the reason as well that I loved being involved in elite sport, and I went to train as a psychologist. Well, I did a sports psychologist. I
see. So, and you said you experienced abuse as a hockey player. Was that from opposing teams or coaches or
all
fans?
Of the above? I think, I was, again, because age me, I didn't have to worry about social media. And I think about that as well, even growing up, not having to worry about my failures or my successes being out there for people to see. I didn't have to deal with that. But yes, I certainly remember being on a pitch or a field, and coaches throwing stuff, shouting, screaming at players, singling players out. I think it was part of how at the time coaching was done, and I just took it as that's what it takes for performance, and now I would challenge that. And also looking at other players around me experience like different forms of violence. And I think it was part of the fabric of my my sporting experience.
I think I played football growing up as well, and into my early 30s. I've recently stopped playing. Six-a-side football was the sort of final thing. And then I just get injured almost every other week now. So I've actually taken up boxing training instead as a replacement to keep fit.
But not stop the injuries.
Well, no, it has, because it's more upper body. So my injuries are always lower limbs all the time. But yeah, I remember I actually quit football when I was probably about 10 or 11 for a while. And I remember being in the bathroom one morning. My mum was going to take me to a football game. I was playing for a team called Junior Cherries at the time, and I was crying and said I didn't want to go. So my mum said, okay, we're not going. Because of the week before, the coach and parents a lot of the time on the sideline were so abusive and just, screaming insults if you made mistakes, and just, for a child that young to experience that is a lot to take in when you're just trying to focus on the game you're playing on the pitch.
Yeah.
And that's enough to concentrate on, let alone having to try and block that stuff out on the sideline. And it's like a lot of parents on the sideline can't control themselves when they get into that zone of being at a sporting event. Something clicks and they just become, Neanderthals almost, like.
Yeah, and that it's that all there's now, and I'm really grateful actually to research in a field that is very inclusive, very supportive. I really look at some of the key researchers that I'm fortunate to work with or be involved with, and it's not about making people go further or faster. It's about the field, and I think that's because the work that we're doing really does have an impact on people's lives and their safety. And that research-based shows, it isn't. I've taken an elite sport focus a lot of the time. It isn't elite sport. It is across grassroots sports. It's about kids' playing experience, their enjoyment, parental behaviour or fan-related behaviour, and just that, we have different ideals of what is acceptable when it comes to the passion of sport performance. And I'm really fortunate to work with some researchers in Australia from Victoria University at the moment. They're just doing some incredible work out there, looking at disclosure, and the kid that sits in the back of the car and does actually speak to a parent because of how they felt. And unlike your mum saying, okay, you don't need to do it, or you're right, that's not right, them going, well, that's sport. That's what it takes. And again, their work out there, they've done some great work on prevalence of violence in youth sport and grassroots sports that just hasn't been done. And the field is fantastic. It's constantly evolving with brilliant people who are super supportive.
So what do you think is the long-term solution to this, or is this something you're trying to work out as you do your research? Do you have something in, what do you, especially with the online stuff, it feels like it's out of control, really, like there's not really a way to govern it.
And especially now with, we talk about embracing more than human interaction. We're not just talking about humans, we're talking about bots, we're talking about algorithms that are created.
Well, and what percentage of the people who write the comments are bots? I mean, you never know, do you?
You never know. No. You don't know where that interaction... there's fantastic things that come from lives that are connected, especially when we look at what we all went through with lockdown and what could have been led to further isolation if we didn't have these spaces. However, I think there is a growing political movement, a global movement to say these spaces need to be regulated more, but we're not in a place where we're doing that. Part of the thing that came out of the UN conversation was it's going to take a multi-agency, multi-country approach to this because it is such a huge part of life, but also there are significant concerns with welfare, mental health, addiction. The list goes on in terms of what the different parameters of how we interact online, how that will have an impact on physical interaction. What was interesting from sport is sports now are turning to AI to safeguard. So, for example, FIFA launched a report, World Athletics provided a report, among other sports, and they've put in almost like a buffer, so an AI buffer around games to keep athletes safe and to filter violent commentary. I was asked to comment on that. Well, I think it's great. So I sign up, I'm going to the Olympic Games. or the Paralympic Games, I sign up and I give my ID. However, this is a simple way of explaining it. I'm safe for the duration of the games.
So it works sort of...
It ring fences so it can filter information.
So by location and time, essentially.
It can make sure that it removes or filters abusive comments. It can then give us an idea of the prevalence of those, the type of comments. It can then escalate to, policing agencies if needed. Like I'm safe for a game's time, and then I leave that environment. But it also leads to further inequalities in that if I'm in a sport that has money to put that in place, say, I was on the panel with an incredible member looking at integrity for the ITF, the International Tennis Federation, and yes, I'm an elite tennis athlete and I'm protected. That's not going to happen in every sport and every country. But also I find myself sitting here thinking that technology is available. So why isn't that just part of what social media companies are putting in place? And again, it comes down to the, which the notion of freedom of speech.
Well, I was about to bring that up. To play devil's advocate, I was going to say, what do you think about that?
Exactly. And that's the premise of why these spaces were set up. And I still sit with the fact that human rights and welfare should trump freedom of speech, but we're not there yet. We're just not there yet, and we're better at detecting certain types of violence. There was a news piece, I think, just yesterday looking at, now we might be better at identifying some types of violence, but for example, misogyny, gender-based violence is still not listed as one of those protected terms when we look at safeguarding some of these spaces. So I think it's really complex, and I'm learning all the time. I'm a sports psychologist. I'm a researcher in psychology and sociology. I'm not a media specialist. So
you are now.
I know. You should see me, and my IT skills are not great, but I find the environment fascinating.
What do you think, if we can just dig into that freedom of speech argument a little bit more? Because I watched a short excerpt from an interview with Elon Musk yesterday, a BBC journalist, who was basically trying to push Elon to say, why haven't you put in safeguarding things like this on Twitter? And Elon Musk, I think probably rightly so, challenged him back to say, okay, what stuff would, where do you draw the line? Because... I think we would probably agree that everyone should be open to some form of criticism. But then when does criticism become abuse? Is it the choice of words? Is it when it becomes too personal? It must be a really difficult thing to define the difference between, say, criticism and abuse or whatever. And
that's it. And that's kind of where we're at the moment in terms of what would be deemed criminally abusive, for example, because even you look at it, the beginning of this research area in social media, a threat of physical violence, so a death threat online, still wasn't deemed credible because it's online. But you hear athletes or other high-profile people saying that, and there is a very real fear for their physical safety. And those threats extend often beyond them, to their family, to those around them. And so really and I think they're critical questions about, well, what would be deemed freedom of speech, but what breaches that in terms of it, it affecting the rights, the welfare of the recipient. And I don't think we're there in answering that at the moment. But what we do know is that we have different rules for how we engage online. There's different levels of what we deem being acceptable. And I think,
we each have those personally.
And that's what we see in the research, that we don't view it as a real environment. We see it as an environment where it's just words online, and we don't necessarily see the impact of that as well. So the impact of our comments on others. I certainly don't have the answers to that. But I think being able to work collaboratively with social media companies towards being able to better maintain safety in those spaces. And I think often we've seen the responsibility with the person using, social
Well,
media.
I was going to say, is that the answer for them to put their own preferences forward? But that's not really a thing. Like a child, I wouldn't want my child to have that responsibility to decide what they feel is abuse once they've received it,
and to know when to report it as well. It was one of the things that I spoke about on the panel, in that often we do take very, person-centric approaches. So we don't do enough of this at the moment, but educating athletes, for example, on how to stay safe online, even within different apps, to be able to know what sort of mechanisms they can put in place for screening people, blocking people. There's information out there. But I was on a panel once with someone from the ITF, and they said, held up a phone, and they said, if you were teaching your child to swim, would you throw them in at the deep end?
Some people might argue, yes.
But most of us would maybe put some kind of measures in place.
Well, you don't want to put them off for life, do you?
Yeah, we might put some armbands on, and we might we'd go through some safety filters. We'd give them some skills to be able to navigate the water safely, you would hope. But most of us would hand our child a smartphone or an online device and not think about it as being as dangerous. So that there is an element of like training and upskilling that is a personal responsibility, but it isn't going to work in one direction, I don't think. And I think that's the conversation. Certainly the IOC are really championing at the moment around games time safety and the Safe Sport initiative, that if we are safeguarding people, we need to do that both in physical and virtual environments. And we can't really tell the difference between them anymore. It isn't about, these worlds are intimately entwined. They're connected rather than being viewed as separate.
Absolutely. I guess it's about education ultimately, educating both sides of the coin. And everyone.
It is. It really is.
You also, I noticed on your profile page on the university website that one of your research papers was about sledging in sport. So that's specifically abuse from opponents. Yeah. What do you think about that? Because again, to me, growing up playing sport, that's almost a part of the sport. It's a tool that an opponent has to gain the upper hand. Do you have a different opinion on that now you've sort of?
Yeah, I mean, I've played sport. Of course, it's part of. And certain sports have a greater culture of
particularly,
that.
I was thinking boxing, beforehand,
Cricket's known for
cricket
sledging, like basketball as well. Interestingly, we were asked, so like you are often, myself, I was asked to do the piece that was, this is outright abusive. And there was another academic that was asked to do it, this is psychological strategy. And then people were to read both pieces and then make their own mind up, really. What we actually found was, because it went online, I got abused online because my viewpoint was rubbish, and then the other academic got abused online because theirs, whereas people could have gone on and just agreed with an argument. And I think for me that really epitomised.
So say that again.
So I wrote the piece basically saying this is abuse,
right? And
people go on and go, oh, you're rubbish.
People abused you.
Yeah, you can't wrap people up in cotton wool, and then the other academic wrote that this is part of the sport, and people went on going, this is abuse, and it really showed me that actually these environments are polarizing, but they're spaces where we want our opinion heard. And I guess I still stand on, and if I was working with athletes, that there is language and behavior that fits within the rules of performance, and there are times then when you stretch over that line and what you're doing becomes abusive. That was actually linked to a cricket case where the language went beyond the sport. It became about thinking about the family, the people around a person, and again we've seen threats of violence that extend beyond. Like I would personally say that's not within the realms of the sport, but I'm sure people would argue with me.
It's that win at all costs thing, isn't it? Was it Vince Lombardi or something? I vaguely remember from A-level sport.
and that's where people justify behaviours, and that's again, I think, where some of the research we've seen on emotional abuse in sport, as an example, people find that harder. You know, if we look at sexual abuse in sport, we can easily say that's criminal. It has no place, and so, you know, it doesn't have a space in sport. Whereas when it becomes emotionally abusive behaviour, there's more of and that is the most prevalent type of violence that anyone would experience. And understanding actually repeatedly that can still cause significant psychological harm, and that is down to the recipient of that behaviour as well.
Have you worked with anyone who's experienced, you know, particularly gross levels of this, and has it affected them, you know, their lives, their personal life, or even their, you know, the sport, conducting sport or anything?
I'm really fortunate that I get to balance the work that I do in that my teaching, it gets me to teach this to our undergraduate, postgraduate students. My research area I'm passionate about, but I'm also a practitioner. So as a sports psychologist, I've noticed that shift as well, that with screens around major games and an online social commentary, there's more of a consciousness around what will people say about me online? What do I need to put up with? The scrutiny of performances, the impact of that on athletes, confidence, performance anxiety, sleep behaviour, mental health. There is an impact on this, and we're seeing that more often, not just in sport, but the people that engage in online spaces can have maladaptive mental health outcomes as a result of that.
I can imagine. I wouldn't say I've ever really experienced abuse online, but even you know, putting things up on social media, whatever, your work or something, and someone says something that's even just slightly critical about it, it plays on my mind for a little while afterwards. So I can't even imagine like someone at the top of the game who's receiving just, you know, hundreds and hundreds of abusive messages or whatever online, and how they can just block that out and still be able to focus.
Yeah, and then let's face it, they're not just about they can be about performance. And, you know, the one thing I would say from working with athletes, they are the most self-critical anyway. Like, if I've performed poorly, I will know that and I will feel it. So to repeatedly see that has an impact. But that, you know, that isn't necessarily, it's when, you know, I have an example of an athlete that the fan base deemed them not to play well, and then the threats were about die. You know, you don't deserve to live as a result of this. You know, they become very, very aggressive in nature. They're very targeted. Like that's not within the running commentary of performance and fandom. Like, it's
ridiculous
abuse.
Who takes time out of their day to do that as well. I can't imagine who these people are who type something like that and don't stop before they send it and think, I probably shouldn't send that.
Yeah,
it's not really necessary. You know, I'm wasting my own time doing this.
Or there's a perception, especially with elite athletes, that, well, it's not them maybe managing their media, or it might not even go to them. But I would say a lot of athletes do want to have control over their own brand.
Yeah, and rightly so, I think.
Rightly so. And so it does go to them. And if not, you know, I might be asked for comment on it because a media outlet picks it up. So I do think that commentary is seen, and you know, it's part of that fabric of performance, you know. But it's not just older athletes either. I can think of a number of youth footballers transitioning from one team to another, and like the abuse that, you know, we're talking 15, 16-year-olds that get abused because they move club.
It's rife.
Yeah.
I mean, it just reminded me of a story from. So I was probably in my 20s at this point, but playing for another local club here. But another club wanted me to sign for them. Bumped into them in a nightclub. The guy came up to me and said, "You're going to sign for us or what?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure." And he grabbed me by the throat and said, "You know, effing signing for us or what?" kind of thing. And his mates kind of came in and sort of pulled him away. But it was, people just get really riled up about this stuff. And that's at like Sunday league level. Isn't, you know, it's supposed to be good, just, you know, if it's for exercise or fun or whatever. I mean, obviously I took it quite competitively as well, but it's just crazy, I think.
And now with even at any level, people can have a social media presence. And, you know, I think about for kids to not be able to switch off. is 24/7.
Well, that's almost a separate, not a bigger issue, but just another issue, isn't it? Social media as an entity in itself.
That's it.
And how it's changed.
And it's too easy to say, well, if you don't like it, switch off or sign out. Because I say, I come back to the power of these spaces, their importance. Like some of the work that we've been looking at more recently is on safeguarding and reclamation of power. I look at some of the key cases where we've seen change in sport linked to highly abusive culture. It's come from collective athlete voice online. For example, linked to the Athlete A documentary in America, and then the hashtag Gymnast Alliance. That's led to considerable reform and review of gymnastics, but that's just one sport example. But that came from people being able to unite online, and that wouldn't have happened in the past. We wouldn't have been able to have that form of collective voice.
Yeah, so it's an important tool that needs to be somehow managed. You've also recently, what's the other thing you did recently? I made a note of it earlier. Oh, Team England. You were part of Team England, right?
Yeah, I'm a sports psychologist, so an HCPC registered sports psychologist, and
what does that stand for? I love picking
Healthcare Professions Council. So it's quite a big thing at the moment in that like sports psychology, sport and exercise psychology is a regulated profession. And if people work with a sports psychologist, they should be checking that they're working towards that status, or that they are a registered professional. So I work to gain that status. And as a result, I've been really fortunate to work. No, do you know, I saw someone speak the other day and they said that we have to be less saying, oh, I'm lucky or I'm fortunate to do it. No, I've worked hard. And I've worked hard in my role as a psychologist. And as a result of that, I have taken athletes and teams to major games. And on the Gold Coast, I went to the Commonwealth Games with beach volleyball, which was a fantastic experience, and I was a team leader, so took a management role as well in that. And then as a result of that role, I got the opportunity to work with Team England at the Birmingham Games, so looking at the team behind the team, and supporting the transition out of games time, but also the COVID response in games time. Because the world had kind of moved on, but sport in lots of countries was still functioning under a COVID bubble, and Birmingham was under COVID protocol. And we knew that we had teams coming into that games time environment, and we could see positive COVID results, and that would have the potential to cause both a medical and a mental cascade. So I was in there as a psychologist, working with the teams coming through there to be able to help manage that medical chain.
Wow. What sort of thing do you do? I mean, how do you manage that psychological aspect of that?
Part of what we went with was information, that actually, so for example, I could have come in off of an aeroplane from another country, and if my result was inconclusive or it was positive, I was then moved into an isolation area. It was quite difficult to get information into there. We had someone present in that space all the time. So when it happened, because they were processing hundreds and hundreds of people per day, there was a chance that a result was inconclusive, but it didn't mean you had COVID.
Airports, you mean? Or...
No, it was a games time bubble,
right.
So people came into that space and then went out into the games time environment. So we knew that results could come back inconclusive, but we made sure that whoever was in isolation was given information, that we managed teams. We also managed how the risks, so you basically got, you don't have COVID, and then you could go into the games time environment. But we managed how that was done as well to try and reduce some of the anxiety around waiting. You imagine you've been training for a Commonwealth Games, and the same thing happened in Olympic environments, and you're sat for as long as it takes for a test, thinking, okay, do I have COVID? Will I be able to compete?
You've trained for years to get to this point.
Yeah,
so there's quite a lot of anxiety.
We helped just manage that process.
Yeah, right.
And then I was also part of just the Team England environment around that on games time delivery, because it's really cool. When you come in as an athlete or a team, you're very focused on yourself and your performance, but you come in and you become part of one team, Team England, or part of like the part of the pride there, or in Team GB, you become part of that setup, or Para GB. But when you then look at what goes on behind that, there's a whole team performance staff, medical staff, administration staff that just create these incredible environments for people to perform. And so it was really nice to sit on that side and to get that insight and be part of the team behind the team.
Quite amazing, really.
Yeah, cool.
Do you have an opinion on, I mean, presumably you think sport is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate as to why you think that, or?
It's been such an important part of my life. I look at the opportunities that I've probably had, and even as a researcher, it sounds really cliche to say that I probably wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I didn't have sport. I'm dyslexic. I didn't really get on very well at school, and I wasn't academic, which I have to watch myself saying, given the role that I do now.
Well, I think you'd probably be surprised at the number of academics who work here who might say that it's a similar thing.
And for me, sport was something that I really excelled at, and it, like I said, it provided opportunity, and again, then being competing and thinking, okay, I didn't have this support, and then going on and studying psychology, and all the way through it's been the running theme that's driven me. Being part of teams, it's taken me to different places, and I know that's a very personal experience. But regardless, in a time where it's so easy to stay in your house or be online or do other things, to be active, to move, the importance of that for our physical health, our mental health, for me is absolutely essential, especially for young people. So it doesn't need to be elite sport. It's about being physically active and moving your body, I think is incredibly important.
Do you think you also learnt a lot from playing a team sport when you were young? Yeah,
I mean, I'd always been involved in team environments. I think that's me. I love people. My friends would describe me as like a Labrador, or a golden retriever. I'm like, come on, I'd always, the same in research. I'd always much prefer to work collaboratively. I've got built great networks because I don't like to do things on my own. I think people challenge you to think critically, or they challenge your opinions and ideas. And team environments for me have always been a space that I love being in. I've worked as a psychologist with both team and individual athletes, but yeah, I love those climates and environments. I think they're incredibly important. But also, I can still remember sport challenging me, and I failed. I was deselected. I remember sobbing at not making an England team, and my parents picking up the pieces of that. But are just really important experiences as well, in failing, in not being good at things, in the upset of losing, and they're just really valuable lessons.
Did you play for England?
Yeah, junior and into senior development, but it's interesting. I struggled with injury for one. I also really struggled with my confidence at times, and I think that's probably what led me to go into psychology as well. But yes, I did, is the answer to that question. And I competed at good club level as well. And retired a little bit a while ago. But
did you when you say you struggled with confidence, was it your own ability? You never felt like you were kind of good enough, or in what way?
Yeah, I just think that, like I said, sport, and especially elite sport environments, are about comparison, and they're about pushing yourself to be the best. And like I said, at times I dealt with setbacks and deselections, and I think they hit hard, and I probably could have. Now I look at the work that I do as a psychologist, and I think I probably could have recovered from them better. I could have coped with them more effectively. And that importance of psychological skills training and understanding those experiences have become really important to me. But also I'm highly self-critical. Yeah. And I've got really high standards, and those things make you a bit miserable.
So you beat yourself up when things don't go well.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think I probably feel the same whenever I was on a football pitch. I used to push myself really hard, but I never got to anywhere near. I played semi-professionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, never went that far. But also, I used to struggle with my self-esteem, I think, and my confidence, and it took me until I was about probably mid-20s to realise I was actually good at football. And by that point, it's almost too late as a footballer to do anything about it.
That's it. And it's so funny, isn't it? That whole, when I look at it, like, what would I say to myself then, or what do you learn? And I guess that is part of that journey, and the journey we're all on, because continue to be on now as like an academic, whether it comes to like a paper rejection or creating opportunities. Like, I think it is in competitive climates, you've got to take some time for self-care. You've got to recognise the impact. And I think an interesting flip for me is now I'm a parent. I've got 2 little ones, and my shift's changed. I think I'm in a much better place with who I am, because I'm genuinely in a place in my life where I'm really seriously happy with my lot.
Oh, that's lovely.
And that's nice as well.
That's interesting. Do you think having children has shifted, your priorities in life? I mean, I assume it must have done.
Yeah, I mean,
I've got 2 children as well, by the way.
Yeah, is. I mean, when you said podcast, I was like, great. When I knew it was video, I was like, I literally look about 400 years old at the moment. We've got a 5-month-old. I work more intensively because time is more precious.
Yes.
I am completely uncompromising in wanting to have time for and with my family. I think I'm more driven in lots of ways as well, but in a really focused way. I've learned more about emotional regulation being a parent than I ever did on a sports field. like toddlers are literally the test of like breathing control. But I'm loving the challenge of it.
Yeah, it is a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when they're that age, and
I don't.
You can't talk sense to them. You can't if they're crying or whatever.
Yeah,
it's just,
and I think that we have to have these conversations about that. Especially in academia, where we expect to be pushing in different areas, be it research or practice or teaching, about the balance of that with lives at home and caring responsibilities, and as a woman academic, being able to balance those things for you as well. I think it's really important to talk openly about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna talk a little bit about that as well, but this is your eldest, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Do you know, when you asked about the pictures, and it was like things that mean something to you. Actually, they kind of go together. This was the day that I left home to go to the Birmingham Games.
Right.
And it was the first games that I've gone away as a parent. And I was away for 6 weeks. I was in nearly 5.5 weeks. And I was it was a bubble.
That's a long time. How old was yours?
That's Ellisdale. So he
age,
would have been 1.5 or just coming up to just off of 2 at that point.
Yeah, so 6 weeks is a long time at that age, yeah.
It is. It's a really long time. And but also the balance of that. We really, so my wife and I have really good discussions about things you choose to do and the impact of that. So, I'm really fortunate that it was like, well, you got to do it. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
But also, having things for our boys to be proud of now, boys, because we have another little boy that was born at the end of November.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Am I still within range to say congratulations?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yes, I left and the games was really different, but also I think it's important, like I said, for like my boys to be proud, to see what their parents are doing, But now I do make decisions and consider the broader impact of those on my family. And I think that's where this picture came from, the raising future leaders. So I really thought, I work on a programme called the Women in Sport High Performance Pathway, and it's led at University of Hertfordshire, and it's part of Olympic Solidarity, and it is about the fact that we do not see enough women coaches at major games. So I think, and I'll probably get my facts right, I think it was 13%, might have been 12 or 13% of coaches at the Tokyo Games were women. Why is that? Look at now we're seeing more gender balanced games, we're seeing that representation. We're just not supporting spaces for women to thrive as coaches, yet we know that they make incredible coaches. So this pathway is all about, it's a global pathway, and we bring women coaches from all over the world that are working towards, some of them are already coaching that level, some of them are looking to coach that level in the future. And one of the things, like the first couple of days, is like a noticing task, and they send one of the coaches sent this in, and it just really struck me, and again with my research area as well, and whatever it is, just making a safer space for our children, but raising them as future leaders as well. And that pathway, what an incredible place to work on. And I remember being in a session with one of the other facilitators who said male coaches get 100% of the pitch. They coach men's sport, they coach women's sports. Like, women coaches at best get given a quarter or half the pitch. In that we often see women coaching women. It's still a shock. In the news the other day, a woman who's leading a men's program, like, it just shouldn't be a shocker.
Yeah. I always find that sort of counterintuitive almost, that it's a news story still.
Yeah.
If you see, because that almost defeats the point of, it should be normalized completely that it's not even news. You know what I mean? I often think that
exactly
when I see,
that. And so the ambition, and the IOC have been really clear in their ambition to see and to work towards a balance of male and female coaches. And we've seen that in medal offering, we've seen that in but there's gaps everywhere. But I get the opportunity to work on this program with just these incredible women coaches, but also hearing and talking about some of the things that disproportionately do affect us as women. And part of what I hear from coaches is that, the balance of caring, responsibility, and elite sport takes you away. It's the same for men as well, don't get me wrong.
Do you think that's the sort of the main factor, or do you think there's lots of factors at play?
There's so many other factors as well.
What else affects that?
Even some of the impact of like funding and money and positions. So women coaches are more likely to be part-time. It might not be that there are full-time opportunities. That again, it's a broad statement. It depends on the sport. We're seeing more professionalisation of women's sport. We're seeing greater opportunities, but there's been a lag. Women's sport is so vibrant at the moment, and look at the women's football. We suddenly realise there is an appetite if we give it opportunity. So I hope that we're in a place of change, and that's going to take more opportunities to create it as a space for women coaches to thrive.
Fantastic. Should we put these up on the wall while we're on the
great.
Conversation? There's a bit of space over here, so we'll stick that one. Actually, is that clashing a bit? Blue
I can let you sort it afterwards.
I'll put it on the black bit.
Yeah.
There you go. It stands out a bit better.
And again, that's one of my little guys now. I feel bad.
You can put that one up if you like.
I should have popped in my new one. He won't mind.
Yeah. You'll have to bring the 5-month-old a photo next time.
I know, and just stick his little head in.
That's idea,
but yeah, I do. I feel a responsibility as well, especially social media. It's not going to go away, but our kids are going to be navigating a world that was so different to the one that I did growing up, and I'm sure that's the same for every parent. Like the world moves and it changes, and I think moving with it is important, and understanding that, and understanding the space and place of media, social media interaction in the lives of our children is really, really important. But I hope that I'll have a small part to play in making that a little bit safer.
Fantastic. You mentioned, motherhood is a let's say, I don't know, a blocking point in terms of career progression for coaches specifically. Are you finding now that you've got 2 young children that you're having to sacrifice work stuff at all? Is your working pattern changed? Is it having an impact in that respect?
Yeah,
and for your wife. Does your wife work?
Yeah, both of us work, so we share caring responsibilities between us. Both have careers that are important to us. I certainly think, even with periods of, I'm really fortunate actually. Bournemouth University have been fantastic in support, even if it's not necessarily it's supporting in the way that they can. As I didn't give birth to our children, the opportunities for parental leave are very different for me. So I've had the 2 weeks partner leave, which I certainly don't think is enough. I don't think it even scratches the surface, really. But I've been really lucky to be able to spread that across the semester a little bit more. But of course it has an impact. Even just those like sleepy nights, or like the feeling tired, the impact of the day being condensed. When you are a parent, or you have significant caring responsibilities elsewhere, or whatever it is, the lives of the people that work in any environment are complex and rich and made up in different ways, and being able to support that and find ways for people to be most effective within the boundaries of their lives, I think is really important. And like I said, I think it's, in many ways I've been productive because I'm better with my time. But you work late, or you're doing things in different ways to make it all fit.
Do you have that same feeling that I have experienced, that now suddenly you think to yourself, what was I doing? How did I waste all the time I had before I had children? What was I wasting my life doing? Because it feels like I was so unproductive, and now it's almost like when you don't realize what you've got until it's gone. Yeah, that's what it is for time at the moment.
I was definitely training more. I was doing, I think about things, but I just. Even with like the working day, I'm just really more focused on the things that I need to achieve and making the most of every second, but knowing about priorities. And like I said, there's a real balance. I am an ambitious person. And so that the balance of that is really important, and knowing what I want to achieve in each of the areas. But I'm very fortunate. And like I said about this collegiate research network that I'm part of, our work really is about making spaces, places, people safer, or that kind of drives the work that you do. But also now it's balanced with time and care, and with my family, and watching my boys grow up.
Lovely. Don't forget about your cappuccino, by the way.
Thank you.
It might be cold by now.
I don't know whether I wanted to like slurp on that during the...
You'll be all right. Just while I take that time, I had a couple of other notes I wanted to just check out, because there's a few other things I wanted to talk to you about. So you own your own business? Yeah.
So I set up Vector Performance Coaching more as a way to practice sports psychology, but also kept it broader so that, if in the future there could be other practitioners underneath that. But I work as an independent psychologist, coach, consultant, because I think it's really important for athletes to have choice over that. A lot of the time we would work with a psychologist in system, and that's fine, but being able to choose or work with people outside I think is important. But like I said, my practice is essential in that that's what feeds directly into my teaching. I teach an applied sport and exercise psychology unit. I'm teaching theory that is completely up to date and relevant, but I can share case examples like the Commonwealth Games, or bring in speakers and be able to make sure that what I'm delivering is still relevant. To maintain an accreditation, I need to do X amount of hours per year. I need to do CPD. I think that keeps me relevant.
CPD is
continued professional development. To be able to keep my accreditation. And so I'm confident that I'm teaching what is the current field. And the same, another one of the units that I teach on is coach and athlete welfare. We created that because there's been this incredible focus on safe sport now. The welfare related jobs are just exploding in sport, but my research area, so I'm really lucky that Bournemouth University supports that, and it supports the fact that we should be moving with the field and prioritising that blend of practice and research and teaching.
Well, like you say, it's mutually beneficial, really, isn't it? Because you gain a lot from doing that external work as well. Can you give an example of some of the athletes you've worked with in your company, and some of what is the day-to-day life of a sports psychologist? What sort of, I'm trying to get a real insight into, not to steal all your secrets.
So I can't actually name people, but I've worked across lots of different sports, which is fantastic. So individual sports right the way through to team sports, and worked in business. That could be tennis, wheelchair tennis, beach volleyball, motor racing. The sports that I've worked in are varied, and I've also gone into business environments, and really it is based on client demand. So whether that's to do with enhancing the functioning of a team environment, if it's to do with working with individuals to, better help them cope with the demands of performance environments or understand themselves more clearly. It really is driven by the people that you work with. Now, in terms of when I first started, I was probably doing more of that practice. Now I've definitely shifted, and I think part of my research is making me shift. And like I said, I'm working more through coaches. So I've realised with part of the reason that I'm used as a facilitator on the WISH programme that I mentioned with the elite coaches is to bring a psychological lens to that. Well, that's essential. If I work with one athlete, I have an impact on them and their life. If I work with a coach, then every athlete that they interact with can benefit from that. So I bring a psychological lens to what's delivered on that programme, but also look at who's looking after coaches. We don't necessarily think about the coach as a performer, and so some of the work I do on that programme is around coach mental health, coach self-care, psychological skills for coaches to manage high-performance environments as well. So my work's probably shifted in terms of now who I'm working with.
Right. What was your life like growing up? Like you mentioned you played hockey a lot, but what was your sort of family life like, and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Berkshire, so a little place called Wokingham. Actually, I was born in Germany. My dad was in the military, so we lived out in Germany, and I was born there, and then moved back across. Just a really normal kind of middle class environment. My dad was in the military, and then he left to be in the military for 25 years.
Right.
My mum was like a real role model, actually, in that she didn't have any qualifications. She left home very early. She started off as a secretary, and she worked her way up to become the managing director of a company. Just real graft, But in terms of that, I remember my mum working a lot. But my mum and dad both worked a lot to create opportunities for my brother and I. If I needed to be at a national camp in Lillyshaw, they got me there. But they were quite detached. I remember we talk about those parents on the sideline. That was not my parents, I think I probably thought they were disconnected at times. Now I realise they just cared enough to leave me to it. But also, didn't want to put additional pressure on me in any way. So I think I was very lucky in how they managed that. But
it's interesting, that balance, isn't it? Because I think this often, crosses my mind as a parent now. I mean, well, I'm always questioning all the things I'm doing as a parent now. But one of those things, I experienced parents on the sideline who would, almost commentate their son's game or whatever, and always be saying something on the sideline, often put downs, or often praise at the same time. And then there would be other parents who would just stay there sort of silent, and it's hard to know as a parent how much encouragement to give, and at what point to be hands off, and all this. It is a fine balance,
and it's the hardest job. And now working with athletes and working with parents, you realise they're probably never going to get it right either. Because
the kids will always blame you one way or another. Yeah.
I was really lucky, actually. Neither of my parents played hockey. My dad played rugby. My mum was pretty good at lots of different things, but it was my PE teachers that hockey was a big thing. And so I think I always had that. I don't think they ever really knew what was going on either, but they'd be there and they'd shout and support. But I was really fortunate that they gave opportunities for my brother and I to do the things that we loved doing.
Did you have a core role model as a PE teacher at all?
We had a whole PE department that were just incredible. And still now check in. When was I at school? So long ago, started a long time ago. And one of my old PE teachers, Libby, still every now and again, just checks in, asks how I'm doing, and has been, a feature of my life. But the whole department were just great. I lost my mum during the pandemic, and we lost her suddenly. And it's funny, it's not until you lose someone that you realise what an incredible... my mum was just this quiet doer. She'd kind of create opportunities for the family to do things, or did so much behind the scenes that you don't realise until they're gone. And it really made me reflect or look back at, I guess you look back because you kind of grasp the memories. And I realised that while at the time I probably thought my mum was, not that she didn't care, like my mum wasn't pushy. And now I realise that she actually just created this incredible environment for my brother and I to excel, to be driven, but to know that we were doing it for ourselves rather than my parents pushing us. So they were always just unbelievably proud of anything that we did, but not to the point that they said we always had to do it. And I even talking about that deselection letter that came through, I remember my mum saying, like, you don't have to do that. However, if you choose to, we'll help support you in coping with that. And pretty amazing, really.
That sort of freedom to
at
least feel like you're making your own decisions.
That's it. And
whether
again,
you are or not, yeah.
and again, I think it drives, like going back to the boys, it drives me to be, the best mum that I can, especially like with the absence of my mum there.
Yeah. Did your mum die of COVID?
No, we found out in January that she had cancer, but it was curative. So she started treatment, and unfortunately, the chemo led to sepsis. So we quite literally lost her overnight, and that just it was like absolutely devastating for our family. And she saw, so we had our 12-week scan for Ellis, and she saw that, and we lost her the next day. So I look at the impact of that on my life, our life. It was just huge. I think loss in any way is profound and devastating. But also it doesn't half make you, or it made me, and maybe that's the person that I am, and the training I've had, really consciously look at what's important to me, where am I going, where do I prioritise time, because it made me realise that it literally can change overnight. And that's not, not an exaggeration to say that. Everything could change overnight. But I think everyone felt that in COVID as well. And we went through this period of very personal grief because we couldn't see anyone. It was right in lockdown. We weren't allowed to have anyone at my mum's funeral. My brother couldn't get home from Australia. So it was just a real period of reflection. And yeah, but I think I now have I've always had a zest for life. I love people. I'm a passionate person, but even more so, probably makes me unbearable if I'm honest.
Well, I don't get that impression. Yeah. It's good. I think it motivates people around you if you're like that.
Yeah,
it's nice. It's refreshing, actually, to be honest.
But it's because also that we do have an impact on people, and I'm very passionate about people and relationships, and it's often on the coach program that I work on, just done a session on storytelling and looking at, one of the things was like bringing artifacts. So thinking about artifacts, and mine was like this ring. So it's like gold band. It was my mum's ring, and my dad gave me that on the day that we lost mum. And initially I put it on and it felt like it was like heavy with like missing that person. But now it's just a real like reminder of the things she did. My mum listened. If she was to meet you and say, "How are you?" it's not just the process of asking someone, the throwaway. Yeah, right. My mum would genuinely have meant, like, "How are you?" and would have listened to the answer. And now I look at it and I wonder, I'm in the job that I'm in, or I went into psychology where it's a listening, caring role. Was probably what I saw like my entire life. I mean, this is also what she'd like ding on a glass if she wanted to fill up. So I'm apparently now the family like owner of the power.
Would that be for your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. Come on, hey, Jim. Come on, Jim. Like, get me a glass of wine.
I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing! It's amazing that you now wear it. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Really
so,
nice
and
touch.
It does. It reminds me of just what's important, I think.
There was another note I had that I looked at when I looked at my phone a minute ago, which was you did a study in 2016, which was about homophobia in football.
Yeah.
So 2016. How many years later? 7?
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that good maths?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm terrible. Don't ask me. Yeah. Do you know, interestingly, to credit the work, so we've got an incredible team of academics within the sports department. sport and event department, and also across into sport and exercise sciences. And it was a colleague of mine, Dr. A.D. Adams, his work looking at masculinities, but also looking at gender and sexualities. And so I had the opportunity to work with him on some of that. You know, he really looked at what the climate's like as a straight male, but to be able to create inclusive environments or climates in football spaces. So that's where that work came from. So I certainly don't claim it, and he's incredible.
Did you work on that? How were you involved? I mean,
yeah, so it was the opportunity to, again, when you work with people and you look at data so I'm a psychologist, he's a sociologist, we just look at data differently. We use a different set of theories or lenses to be able to look at that. So it was the opportunity. So that particular paper was looking at data from young boys and within a football club environment and their attitudes towards. At that point, it was a gay athlete coming out. You know, I think the study would need to be really different now, especially when we're thinking about LGBTQIA plus and the range of factors that we need to consider in all sorts of environments. But we looked at their attitudes towards a gay teammate and whether or not the acceptance of homosexuality in football spaces. And actually, you know, some of the work looks at really inclusive masculinities as well. But I mean, we're still not at a space where we see openly out male athletes as often. So,
do you think we've moved on a bit since then, or?
Yeah, yes, and I mean, I certainly think that. In women's sport, we it's not as taboo for women athletes to talk about their partner. I think it depends on who you read, and there are some researchers, like I say, that talk about really inclusive spaces and attitudes, but we've still got to see that translate into athletes being able to be comfortable with who they are whilst they're playing, rather than needing to come out in retirement. So can I sit on the fence?
If you like. Sure. It's interesting because, I mean, the word gay when I was young was thrown around as an insult. I don't know if that's still the case.
Still the case now.
Right. I mean, it's also hard to know whether it's my own, it's hard to know from your own subjective perspective whether things have changed because I've moved into a different sphere and you know, the people I'm surrounded with are different and maybe more aware of this stuff.
Yeah.
Or whether it is a societal change at large. You know, it's always difficult as an individual to really gain that. So I guess that's why research is so important, because you get the less subjective, the more objective kind of view of this as an overall thing. But yeah, I remember the word gay just being slung around all the time. Like, you know, just someone does something that you find, they failed at something. It's just gay kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was just so commonplace to do that.
And still, you know, I look at, even though some of the work online that I've done has now focused on women athletes, even the language or discourse in terms of it being gendered is also linked to sexual identity as well. And some of those terms are still used as insult online. So that gender-based violence, or, you know, the slurs that would get thrown at male athletes would still be gendered in nature and linked to identity in lots of different ways. I and again, not to get into that in here, but even looking at some of the discussions as well on gender identity and trans-inclusive spaces, like sport, again, is going through, as is society, going through another incredible period of like a polarised debate. And yeah, I think it's a really challenging time for people that have have sexual identities across that spectrum.
Do you think sport reflects society in that way? Quite often.
I think we only look at elite sport, and that's a shame, because elite sport is different. We don't actually then understand the impact of rules that come in at elite sport and what they do to. Going back to that question, is sport important? Yes, sport and physical activity are incredibly important for all. And so some of the decisions that get made that are preclusive to people being able to access sport, for me, is very, very upsetting.
It's bigger than the sport itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Is there anything else? What's coming up? What's on the horizon for you? Are you working on anything, or any more trips?
I've been. These are the things that. Now I'm at home for a little bit, which is great. I have been included. So the International Olympic Committee write consensus statements. The previous consensus statement on safeguarding in sport was in 2015, and there's going to be a 2023 consensus that has brought together a team of global researchers to write that statement, and I've been named as one of those, which is fantastic.
Incredible.
And part of that is to looking at safeguarding and my work in abuse more broadly, but certainly to bring that online lens. So we're in the process, and with just this unbelievable rock star list of people for me, putting the consensus data together, and then that we'll meet in Lausanne at the IOC headquarters in September.
Whereabouts is that?
In Switzerland.
Switzerland, sorry. Yeah.
Yep. So that for me is just like a really great achievement. But again, possible, I think, because like I said, this network that I'm part of that doesn't just raise themselves up, they pull people along and say, hey, have you been looking at that person's work, or this is happening. So just an environment that I think is about, and also that prioritising the athlete voice, so the victim voice as well. No, that's the International Research Network on Violence in Sport I'm part of. Has just been great in bringing people together globally to share, what's happening, where are we going, what are different countries doing. But it's just a great thing for me to be included in that. And what else is happening? Stuff like doing some great research and great collaborations with, like I said, the partners at Victoria University, but also Charles Sturt University in Australia, both in online and virtual spaces, and just trying to keep the work going. There's a Safe Sport International Conference in September, which is about more about safeguarding and the future of safe sport. And as part of that research network, we're doing a research day for day one of that, all about showcasing the new and emerging research in the safe sport field and creating this really, inclusive space for new, emerging and or current researchers to share practice and, like we said, to look at some of the priorities of the field moving forward.
Amazing. I think the work you're doing is just phenomenal. As I say, I think it's bigger than just sport. Actually, I think it's a societal thing, but I think sport could be the mechanism or the vehicle to promote change wider.
That's it.
Personally.
I can confidently say that the work that not just I'm doing, but it's being done in the field, has an impact on policy, on practice, on theory. But more important, that stuff's almost like nonsense in that it has an impact on people. And like I said, if I think now as a parent about fostering safer, inclusive spaces for my children and other children to access sport, well, that's a really great legacy to be part of. But know that I'm like this, and there are people everywhere in my field doing incredible work.
And I hope it will continue to sort of snowball and get bigger and bigger, that field of work. Cause I think,
the International Olympic Committee, thanks to the Safe Sport unit there, and the team through the IOC within the Safe Sport unit are just fantastic, has just committed 10 million per Olympiad to safe sport. Like that's, and it's a step.
That sounds a lot. Is it
sounds
a lot?
Well, it's a, I'm sure it won't go that far, but it is an incredible platform to say this matters. And
it's almost the acknowledgement of it.
Exactly, yeah. and to look at that and to look at what that will do across international federations, but also to globally say that there is work to be done. But that comes down to some of the work of previous researchers in the field and what they've done, but also mention the Safe Sport unit at the IOC, and it'd be fantastic to see. And part of that remit is to see that have an influence on the ground. And they're doing amazing work.
Anything else?
No.
Should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, Dr. Emma Kavanagh. Nice. Does it feel weird saying doctor? Because to most people it does.
I know. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been brilliant to talk to you. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thanks.